Alright, so we just learned how to divide, or the steps to dividing. If you remember our silly little saying, does McDonald's sell cheeseburgers raw? Divide, multiply, subtract, check, bring down, repeat, or remainder. Okay, so those are our steps. Now we're going to look at, well, what do you do with that answer? That quotient that we now have, what does it mean? Okay, one of the things that I really like to emphasize all year long, you're going to hear me say this and talk about this, but when you're dealing with these situations and these real world problems and word problems and things like that, you must look at what the question is asking. Just because you get some number doesn't mean that you're done. You now have to do something with that and apply that in some form or fashion. And it might even require another second or third step. But we have to look at what our answer says and what our answer means. You can't just leave it as, here's a number, I'm done. Okay, because in real world we don't necessarily deal with remainders necessarily, and when we do, they're in certain situations. So let's look at how to do this. I can interpret the quotient when solving real-world division problems. So this is what I want us to be able to do. So let's take a sample problem and apply this. So the sixth grade is taking a field trip. They need to rent minivans to get there. There are 125 people going. Each minivan can only hold 8 people. How many minivans does the school need to rent? All right, so there's our situation. Now, I look at this and I see a division problem, mainly because we're taking one number and dividing it into groups of 8, and we're saying how many groups of 8 can we get? All right, so let's take that idea. So we're going to divide. I can divide 125 divided by 8. So let's do that. 125 divided by 8. And let's use our steps there again. Divide, multiply, subtract, check, bring down, repeat. Okay, so I'm going to divide. I first look and say, does 8 go into 1? Well, no, it doesn't. So that's a 0. Now I move over. Does 8 go into 12? All right, it does. If I had $12, how many groups of 8 could I take out? Well, I could take out 1. So 1 times 8, we multiply, is 8. We subtract. Check. Well, 4 is less than 8. It's less than my divisor, so I can keep on going. Bring down. Repeat. Now I look at 8 into 45. Well, I know that 8 times 5 is 40, but 8 times 9 is, or excuse me, 8 times 6 is 48. 8 times 5 is 40, and 8 times 6 is 48, which is too big, so I'm going to go with the 8 times 5. Okay, multiply, subtract, nothing to bring down, so now I'm left with, here's my remainder. Remainder of 5. Now, what does this mean? That's where we're left. I have a 15 remainder of 5. Does this mean there are 15 people in each van? Well, no, we already know there's 8 people in a van. So does this mean that I need 15 vans? Well, what about these 5 left over? And let's look at what the question was asking again. How many minivans does the school need to rent? Okay, well, one possibility is I need to take the quotient and add 1 to it. Because let's look at if I had 15 remainder of 5, and if I only did 15 vans, and they each hold 8, that's going to be 120 people. Uh-oh, somebody's left out, aren't they? Can't do that. That's not going to work. So I need to round up and get 16 vans, because you can't take a part of a van. We can't chop a van in half and drive it, because we only, nobody said that our vans had to be full. We just said if you fill them up, you can have 8 people in them. But we want to save money, so we want to rent the least amount possible. So if we go to 16 vans, and 16 times 5 is going to give us 128. Ah, wait a second here. Or excuse me, 16 times 8. 16 times 8 will give us 128. Now this makes more sense. I'm going to have a van that doesn't have a full van, but at least now everybody can go. So the answer to the actual question is I need 16 minivans. I don't need 15 remainder of 5. If you gave me that as your answer for how many minivans that the school needs, that doesn't even make sense. You have to make sure that your answer makes sense and that it answers the question that's being asked. And in this case, I need 16 minivans. Now there are other possibilities as well. What about if they said how many minivans will be completely full? Well, our answer was 15 remainder of 5. this tells me how many full vans there are of 8 people each. So there are 15 minivans completely full. So in this case, we weren't even worried about the remainder, and we didn't have to round, we just left the quotient as is. Another situation could have you only looking at the remainder and saying, well, how many people will not fit into a van if they all were full and you fit 8 into all of them? How many people can't fit into a van, or how many people are left over? And in that case, it was the 5, which is why we need to rent that extra van for these people. Okay, so we're looking at interpreting the quotient. So here are the things that you need to ask yourself. Okay, let's look at. Let me get a highlighter here. Nope, that's the one I want. All right, so one situation is, do I drop the remainder and add 1 to the quotient, kind of rounding up a little bit? I need to add an extra 1 to take the place of that because I can't buy half a minivan, or I can't buy a part of a minivan. It's just impossible. Okay, so that's one situation. That works. Or do I need to just leave the quotient as is and drop the remainder? I don't care about the remainder. I just want the actual quotient part. How many full vans are there? Okay, just the 15. And lastly, it might be asking you something about what's left over. So maybe you just need the remainder as a part of your answer. Okay, these are the 3 things that you need to ask yourself. Do I need to drop the remainder, add 1 to the quotient? Do I need to leave the quotient as is and drop the remainder? Or do I just need the remainder as a part of my answer? So we'll be working more with this in class, and I will see you then.